In today's episode, we are joined by someone I've worked with for years. I'm thrilled to welcome her onto the podcast. Joining us today is Melissa Murphy, a distinguished service professor at the Tepper School of Business at Carnegie Mellon. Melissa is a force for a business education, incredibly dynamic teacher, educator, and does a great job teaching a bunch of classes. When I met her, she was already teaching integrated marketing communications, new product development, launching new products, product and brand management, and a brand strategy class. She joined me as an instructor in the Corporate Startup Lab and ultimately became the lead instructor of that class, really helping take the project course that we teach at the Corporate Startup Lab to the next level. Today, though, I'm having Melissa on because she recently created a pitching generative AI to the C-suite workshop and canvas, which she delivered for the first time at the Corporate Startup Lab's Corporate Entrepreneurship Forum. It was incredibly well received, and so I asked her to share it with all of you. I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation on Agile Giants. All right. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today. I kind of previewed a little bit of this in the intro, but probably focus more on your educational or higher ed leadership. It would be great, though, to just talk a little bit about both your business leadership and also anything you want to add on the higher ed side. So maybe you could start just a little bit around what you've done in your corporate leadership roles.
Sure, absolutely. I started my career on the agency side of the business and had an early exposure to consumer-facing brands in particular, and kind of I've had an ongoing love affair since the beginning of my career. One of my clients at the time was Heinz, and so I did a lot of work for Heinz. Went to work for them as well as Del Monte and Starkist and a lot of other CPG players. I still, even though it's been 10 years in academia, I still identify as a corporate person at heart. So I really enjoyed my time. And I think what I got the most out of it was simply the fact I got to wear a lot of different hats. I was able to do strategic planning, innovation, marketing, communications, crisis, earnings, all sorts of things. So I really enjoyed that time and having that large cross-functional role, and to get to work on consumer brands.
Yeah. So I highlighted a little bit about the classes that you taught and then how, you came in and helped really take the Corporate Startup Lab project course to the next level. One of the things I didn't mention in the intro, but I think it's relevant for this, is I think that CPG experience gives you also a very different perspective on being consumer centric, which is obviously key in innovation as well. And so you can see this in the kind of classes that you teach today, right? You teach some marketing and brand strategy stuff and then some innovation stuff and the intersection between the two. How do you think about like the portfolio of courses that you're teaching at Carnegie Mellon?
So I like my corporate life. I really enjoy them because I get to wear a few different hats. So I've got my core marketing classes and brand strategy classes that I really enjoy, but I also get to do new products courses and do innovation work, and then work with the Corporate Startup Lab, talking about how we bring these entrepreneurial best practices into large companies. So again, I think I'm really attracted when I get to kind of go wide and do different topics and see how things connect versus, more of a narrow focus.
Awesome. And so let's jump into today's conversation. So you created this kind of workshop slash, iteration on the canvas that we've had for a while on pitching generative AI to the C-suite. Maybe before we get into the canvas, what made you, actually want to do this work and create this workshop slash canvas?
Sure, absolutely. I've done a lot of presentations, as you know, on the Corporate Startup Lab, pitching innovation to the C-suite. For those that don't know, it's a great tool that really allows you to look at your innovation practices across the company and what questions, concerns, and things to prepare you as you pitch innovation into the C-suite. So that foundation has been really important because I think it looks at it from a larger company view and not just from a vertical. So when we started talking about generative AI, one of the things that I naturally do is sort of put on my corporate hat and say, well, what would I do with this? How should I think about this? Where are the guide rails of how we should engage on this topic? So I kind of approached the workshop the same way and really said, okay, maybe I'm like a lot of large companies, I'm already doing it, and this is an extension. Or maybe I'm a small to medium company and I am just dipping my toe in the water for the first time. What should I be thinking about? Where should I start? What types of questions should I be asking? And, is this a right fit is this the right solution to the problem or the opportunity that sits in front of us?
Yeah, and so again, it was super well received. I've gotten tons of positive feedback on it. But when you put being the sort of customer centric innovator that you are, when you put yourself in the shoes of the people who are participating in this workshop, what were you hoping they would leave thinking about as it relates to the workshop or
Oh,
behavior that they might change?
yeah, no, absolutely. I hope that it gave them a chance to really think about it from all the different functional areas. But at the heart of it, I wanted to give them a place to start. So if they're already doing it, fantastic. But if they're thinking about it or in some of the early stages, what should they be thinking about? What should they do first, second, and third? Who needs to have a seat at the table? And probably even a bigger question is, do we have the right people to even have a seat at that table to have this discussion? And should we look at other opportunities as well?
Yeah. So all right. So we're at Carnegie Mellon. There's this kind of famous William Gibson quote: "The world's not evenly distributed. The future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed." Like CMU is a very unevenly distributed place. So we've been talking about AI for like, decades, literally here. But when you think about generative AI and the impact on business, though, and this attention that it's getting today, you know, what's your message to executive decision makers around it overall? And then we'll talk about some of the specific elements of the different hats people wear.
Right. And I think what's important is they sit back and look at it like they would any other technology. And I think you've got to be able to put yourself in the seat to say, what goals are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do? And is this the right solution? And do I have the right people and partners to determine that solution? So I think the message I want to get out there is, yes, it's exciting. Yes, it's a new technology, but like with any other type of technology product, we need to take a pretty balanced look at it. There's both opportunity and risk. So where do we net out on that? What is our company's risk profile? Do we have guardrails in place to deal with some of the challenges? And really sort of look at it from that high level of, do we have the right building blocks to be able to do this or continue doing this?
Yeah, on that question around risk and some of these challenges, I was flipping through the slides this morning just to remind myself of it. And I thought your take, especially on chief legal officer, was and sort of some of these data issues was particularly interesting. How are you talking to companies about this, and how would you encourage companies to think about what they might need to think about as it relates to privacy, IP, these kinds of
No,
issues?
absolutely. And I tapped into some of my old colleagues to ask that very question. A attorney that I used to do a lot of work with for earnings was someone that is a very tough nut to crack. And I knew she would be this time no different. So I said to her, hey, if we were doing this together at our company, what should our concerns be? And it was no problem for her to come up with a list to think about it in terms of legal, regulatory, and ethical questions that come about, and also ownership of content can be a challenge too. And I guess the last part with that would be what to do when something is incorrect and it's out there. How do we handle that? How do we deal with those types of issues? So I think there's a lot of things to consider. And I think, as always, legal can be your best friend or your worst enemy inside a large corporation. So I would encourage you to make sure that you bring them on board early and use them
Yeah,
as an asset.
yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting because some of these challenges are technology challenges that you know, it's important for the legal office to actually understand the nuances of them. Like if you think about this evolution of data and what, where the data is going, where it's not, like how we talked about that in June versus today is very different. On the other hand, this hallucination risk to me, although maybe the likelihood of it happening is going down and there's technical
Yeah.
things, like it's hard to imagine that won't be part of the challenge for a while. And I think, the right kind of communication back and forth is important there. And I think these questions really are helpful so that you can kind of establish a baseline, have these conversations, things like that. If you sort of forecast out 12 months from now, though, or even further, like what do you think the role of generative AI is going to be in decision-making processes at the C-suite. So like at the executive level, how is this going to impact how they think about making decisions?
A couple of things on that. I think it's going to challenge them to act faster and to engage on things more quickly. One of the things we talked a lot about in the workshop was the opportunity to create a cross-functional team to even examine the topic and look at that. So how do we organize? Do we have the know-how internally? What are we going to do with that? Should we be partnering? And really sort of looking at it broadly. And making sure that we've got all the right parts and pieces to create this effort and sort of move the team forward in making these decisions. But like I said earlier, it's really about weighing the risk and the opportunity and thinking through all of them, through all of the options, and seeing what's best for the company.
Awesome. And so I want to kind of take these last couple of questions maybe up a level. And because I think to your point, this is an important change, but it's also important to think about how it ripples through to other things. So, with these tools in the toolbox of an organization, I think it's also going to change how they think about other disruptive technology. So the kind of intersection of like these other emerging technologies as well. How do you think companies are going to maybe rethink disruptive technology in general, given the capabilities they're picking up?
I think that's an interesting question, because I think whether they've already dealt with it or it's something that's coming to them in the future, definitely something they should be considering. And I think one of the challenges that you have is, where is the passion for these technologies coming from? Is it coming from the board of directors down? Is it coming from your CTO? Is it coming from someone who's just interested in technology and thinks maybe it could bring the business further on it? So just like we would in a marketing role, I think thinking about who are those passionate enthusiasts internally that we can bring together as part of a team to sort of investigate opportunities. What I wouldn't want to happen in a corporate setting is really people going off on their own and doing things and trying things. I think there has to be some balance of having a sort of a corporate philosophy across the board on how we think about technology, how we think about new applications, and what problems they're going to help us solve. So I think it has to be looked at the highest level and be considered there. And then once you believe that you've got a good technology that's going to be able to help you solve a problem for yourself internally with inside the company or externally for your customers, well, then I think you can build out a team from there and sort of talk about how you operationalize it.
Yeah. So I think that's great. So sort of generative AI and innovation, like that's sort of one of the subject matter expertise that you're known for on campus. Let's do generative AI and marketing for a minute as well, right? So, I mentioned, I feel like you've taught me a lot about being consumer centric, and I really appreciate that. One of the things that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about today, and I would love to get your take on, is like, how does voice of customer, understanding your customer, evolve where you have these large models that are sort of a repository of billions of pieces of content on the internet? Like how are we supposed to think about marketing and being customer centric with these new tools at our disposal?
It's funny, I've had others ask that question before, and we're typically most protective of the functional areas that we know best. So my initial reaction was to say, oh, it'd be great elsewhere. As I've learned and done some homework, I think about it a little bit differently now. But my gut instinct was, yeah, let somebody else test that out. But in reality, I think what's important to understand with it is, hey, there's a new technology, great. Can it help me understand or know my customer better? Does it help me deliver a better product to them? Does it take steps out of that process or that cycle to it? Can it enhance my brand experience? So I really want to be looking at it when I have my marketing hat on, looking at it from that sort of, how is it adding value from internally or for my customers? How does it help me understand and know them better? How does it help me differentiate my brand experience? All important parts of it. And let's talk about sort of the elephant in the room when we talk about generative AI. Who else in my category is using it? And how are they using it to their advantage? And if I don't use it, am I going to be behind? Those are all things that cross your mind in the spectrum of questions that we have around generative AI.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think I think that it's like a wonderful tool, and if you don't use it, you should assume some of your competitors are. At the same time, just blindly following what comes back feels incredibly dangerous to me. So, like, to me, like, there's a colleague at NYU who likes to say, like, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody who knows how to use AI is going to take your job.
Mhm.
And I think that's particularly true in the marketing function. Like, I think marketing is going to be more important 12 months from now,
Mhm.
but because of these tools that are going to make it easier to be customer centric, are going to shorten a lot of those routine cognitive tasks that might have taken longer periods of time before that kind of thing. So I think that's solid advice. Maybe for someone who, and we'll get to kind of generally what do you do if you're just intrigued with generative AI, but maybe for somebody who feels like, okay, I want to pick up those fundamentals to get the most out of these tools.
Mhm.
Like, what would you point people to just kind of understand the fundamentals of being customer centric, kind of marketing 101?
So there's a lot of great tools out there, different readings, different books that have come out in the marketplace for it. I generally like to do my research in small bites. So, and I like to do it on a daily or every other day basis. So I'm always sort of doing that quick scan, both on LinkedIn and other places to see who's released a post, a short article on it, and just tried to stay on top of it that way. I don't think
Uh,
there's a magic tool for this as of yet to make our brains sort of work faster. But I think thinking about it is part of our daily habits as we think about innovation, technology, and growth. I think I sort of factor it within there for that. And I think talking to people about it, I mean, one of the most interesting parts of doing the workshop was really understanding the scope of the questions that were being asked from, like I said, everywhere from what if
yeah,
I don't do it to we're already doing it.
right.
Where else can we do it? I think is important.
Yeah.
And another thing I think to watch out for, it's interesting. There's a post the other day, and I won't say who posted it just because the comments weren't all favorable, but there were a lot of people really questioning generative AI and the job loss piece of it. And you and I both know, and I agree with what you said about the quote from NYU about how to think about that. But I think companies really have to understand that if that is a fear of their employees, though. We can sit here and say that's not really the concern, but that's not going to make anyone feel better. So I think understanding your company culture, how it feels about new technologies, how you're educating all of your employees on new technologies, and how you're answering those questions, I think are critically important. In absence of information, people will have their own takeaways, and you do not want that, whether it's a customer or an employee. So we want to use everything that we have to educate and determine if this is the right tool
That's exactly
or technology for us.
that's exactly right. Um, yeah, no, this fear part of it is a real thing, and it's not new, but I think the accessibility of generative AI has accelerated that. Like, at least when it was statistical models and complex regression, people may not have really, but like when anybody can go to ChatGPT, like
Mhm.
the accessibility makes this
No,
different.
yeah, and it's no different than, oh, sorry, I was gonna say, it's no different than any other technology, though, in terms of thinking about change management. So when we're looking at our internal structure and how we think about this, again, do we have a culture that is adaptive, that's used to change, accepting of change, and has sort of made it part of our corporate ethos? Or have we done something the same way for 20 years? That's going to change the way the employees think and feel about it. So I don't think it's a good or bad, but I think you have to be realistic about where your company is on the spectrum and how they think about it, and how your employees feel about it.
Right, and that gets actually to the last thing. So maybe anything else like that, that when you're thinking about this intersection of executive leadership and generative AI, like what are you telling the executive leaders that come to you for advice around this topic today?
Definitely. First and foremost, I like to get a pulse on how educated they are on the topic as a whole. And are they being responsive to a board of directors question? Or are they genuinely curious? Or they're already doing AI and they want to know how this connects or relates to that and how they should think about it? So I think at the C-suite level, it's really those bigger, broader strategic questions, and making sure they've thought about it. They're always looking for new opportunities and growth. So of course, there's going to be interest in that, but you have to understand it first. You have to understand where your company is today, and then what that roadmap looks like to get there for it. So really trying to help them build the roadmap as opposed to here's the quick fix, the quick answer to this, to solve their problems and issues that they have.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think some of them, like sometimes it's the boards, but also sometimes it's like these guys go and they try it out and it works magically sometimes and not magically other times. And I think this sort of more helpful lens of like, okay, well, let's really unpack why it is great, Melissa. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today. We'll make sure to include links to kind of your social media channels so people can follow along. But what's the best way for listeners to stay aware of what you're doing?
I'm sure. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to have followers and love to engage there for it. But also you can reach me at CMU as well through email and other channels. Happy to talk, happy to share the full list of questions that we came up with for part of this workshop and the tool that we used. I think we've sort of touched the surface today, but there's a lot of depth to the questions we looked at and the conversations that we had that I think could really benefit a lot of folks that are sort of in these early stages of trying to figure out, does this fit? Does this solve my problem? Definitely connect, and I'm happy to share and have other conversations about pitching generative AI to the C-suite.
Yes, I guess that's a good. I was going to ask you that. So the best way to get a copy of the workshop slides is just, of the Canvas draft is to just reach out to you. Is that right?
Yep, absolutely. We're as all good tools are. It's in its iterative stage right now, so. We're still taking input. So Sean, if you have any questions you'd like us to add to it, please let me know, or anyone who's listening to this, please let me know. I'm happy to add those as well. But yeah, definitely reach out to me and that'll be the best way to do it.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much. Really appreciate you joining today, Melissa, and hope you have a great one.
Thanks, Sean. You too.